Tales for Dark Nights. Good evening. For your enjoyment, we'd like to bring you this spine-chilling tale of terror from my personal collection.
The Corpse by Craig Groshek. Narrated by Otis, Jiry. In a tiny log cabin, deep in the woods and surrounded by trees, lived a man and his wife. The small house had but a single door and a small window directly across from it. The couple lived alone there for many years until they had grown old and gray. One day the man, returning in the evening from hunting, found his wife bedridden and dreadfully ill. So sick was she that he could not bear to leave her side, and as they had no neighbors and no doctors for miles, the old man tended to her as best he could, but she did not recover and soon died. The man was overwhelmed with grief, but shed no tears. At this he was ashamed. "Surely it is unkind to not cry for one's wife once she has died," he thought to himself. "Tomorrow," he said aloud, "I shall have to make a coffin and dig her grave, and certainly I will miss her once she is buried and out of sight." The very next morning, the man did as he said. He built his wife a fine coffin and dug a fine grave. Standing over the grave outside, he said to himself, "It is all right. Things cannot be as bad as they seem." And he returned to his cabin. Once inside, the man lifted his wife and laid her in the coffin upon his table and stood over her body. In the waning light, he adjusted her hair and bound her wrists with a ribbon, as was custom at the time, and laid her hands across her chest. He looked at her for a moment and missed her dearly. "It's all right," he said again. "Perhaps she has not passed on at all, but is fast asleep." But he looked upon her pale face, and he was certain she had died. Soon the old man finished her coffin, and with a sigh closed its lid upon her. Sinking into a chair beside his wife, he laid his arms upon the table's edge and fell asleep. After some time, he could not be sure how long, there came through the open window a long, wailing cry from deep in the darkening woods, but the old man did not move. Exhausted, and thinking nothing of it, he soon fell asleep again. Just then another unearthly cry sounded in the woods, now closer than before. The man awoke with a start. "Perhaps it was some animal, or just a dream," the old man said, and he dozed off once more. Some hours later, the old man woke again. He was not sure why, but he felt that somehow the room had changed. He lifted his head from the table and listened carefully. All was silent. Straining his eyes to see in the darkness, he looked toward his wife. He could not see a thing. He waited. Suddenly the table beneath him shook. Too frightened to speak or move, the old man did nothing. Then he heard the sound, ever so softly, of a step, as of feet on the floor beside him. Terrified, the old man rose slowly from his chair and groped about in the darkness. Who is there?" the man asked. Suddenly, something heavy was flung against the table, and the man was nearly knocked to the floor. At the same time, he heard a thump as something was dragged and fell upon the floor. The weight of it shook the small cabin. Stretching his hand across the table, he sought for his wife. The table was empty. The man was terrified. He rose slowly from his chair and asked, "Wife, is that you?" No one spoke, but soon he heard dragging again. The floorboards creaked under the weight of something heavy, which shuffled toward the cabin's window. At that moment, a scuffle broke loose. It seemed something had slammed itself against one wall and then another. Furnishings were overturned, pots and pans thrown to the floor and smashed. The old man felt he would soon go mad. Rushing to the nearest wall, he groped about and seized his loaded rifle and, without bothering to aim, fired it. By the flash which lit up the room, the old man saw a most horrible sight. Across the room, dragging his dead wife by the throat toward the window, was an enormous black creature. It was nothing he had seen before, easily twice the size of any wolf. It glared at him with its yellow, sliver-like eyes, and its fur bristled. In a second, the man fired another shot, and the thing let her go, and sprang from the floor and out the window. Then it was gone, and the old man fell to the floor, unconscious. He woke the next morning. The sun was high, and birds were singing. For a moment, he thought he must have been dreaming. But he rose from the floor and found his table empty, the coffin overturned on the floor. Near the window lay his wife, where the beast, frightened by the gunshots, had left her. Her long hair was tangled and her clothing torn. A great deal of blood, not yet settled, had poured from her throat and pooled. This was not the worst thing he had seen. The ribbon which he had bound her wrists for burial was broken. Her hands, which had been laid flat before and over her chest, were at her sides and clenched tightly. Her eyes were open wide in terror. Beneath her teeth was the creature's ear.
I hope you enjoyed this evening's little tale. Until next time, bundle up, stay warm, sleep tight.